When I first moved into Thornridge Estates, I thought I had finally escaped the chaos of city living. The neighborhood looked peaceful, the homes were well kept, and the residents seemed friendly enough, at least during the initial handshake and welcome greetings. It felt like the right place to start fresh after a stressful few years of bouncing from rental to rental. That illusion lasted exactly 47 days. The midnight email that changed everything arrived at 12:03 a.m. Time no reasonable HOA would ever choose for official communication. Yet there it was. A bold, cold announcement from the Thornridge HOA board claiming that all residents' monthly dues were being increased by 35% effective immediately. The justification? Emergency neighborhood maintenance needs. No explanation. No vote. No prior notice. No transparency. Just a demand for more money sent while the entire community slept out the next morning. Neighbors flooded the community group chat with confusion and anger. Some were terrified. Others were desperate for answers. A few simply accepted it because they feared retaliation from the HOA, which, in this neighborhood, was a very real threat. The board had a reputation for aggressive enforcement and a strange obsession with secrecy. But something about the midnight timing felt strategic, almost like they wanted to slide it through unnoticed. I couldn't shake a feeling of wrongness. HOA bylaws were clear any fee increase had to be voted on with 14 days' notice and community participation. I had read every line of the contract before moving in, so I knew this midnight emergency meeting was illegal. But the board didn't stop there. In the morning, they followed up with a second email threatening late fees, property liens, and suspension of community privileges for anyone who didn't immediately comply. They didn't even bother hiding the intimidation. The message was loud and clear. Pay quietly or suffer the consequences. Many residents, including elderly neighbors who lived on fixed income, were devastated. Some couldn't even afford the sudden increase. One woman cried on her porch, saying she might have to sell her home because she couldn't keep up. That's when it clicked for me. This wasn't incompetence. This was exploitation. I decided I wouldn't let it go. I started digging not recklessly, but systematically. I pulled the HOA bylaws, screenshotted the midnight email timestamps, and checked the board's official meeting log on the community portal. That's when I found the first crack. According to the log, no meeting had taken place on the night the board claimed the increase was approved. The page wasn't just empty, it had been manually edited the next morning. That meant someone was covering their tracks. I took screenshots of every detail before they could change anything else. And then something even stranger happened. An anonymous resident forwarded me a photo of the board members at a private dinner the night of the so-called emergency vote. They were smiling, holding wine glasses, not sitting in any meeting. The more I investigated, the more corruption surfaced. The board claimed urgent repair costs, but invoices posted in the portal were outdated or duplicated. Thousands of dollars were allocated for work that didn't exist. Someone was stealing HOA money and forcing residents to pay for their cover-up. And at the center of the mess was the HOA president, Gordon Halai, a man known for silencing anyone who dared question him. But this time, they had made a mistake one big enough that they couldn't bury. Because they didn't know that I had something that could destroy their entire scheme. Digital proof that the vote never happened. The minutes were falsified, and the emergency claim was a complete fabrication. The problem was, exposing it would make me the target of the board's full retaliation. And in Thornridge, retaliation could get ugly. But I wasn't backing down. Asterisk, I didn't waste any time. The next morning, while the neighborhood churned with frustration and helplessness, I quietly began assembling every piece of evidence in a locked digital folder. I knew the board played dirty. Everyone in Thornridge whispered about it, but I didn't realize how quickly they would move once they sensed resistance. Before I even finished my first cup of coffee, an HOA compliance officer named Mason Trent showed up at my door. He didn't knock politely. He pounded like he had a warrant. When I opened the door, he didn't greet me or explain anything. He just handed me a thin envelope with a smug half-smile. Inside was a formal notice of known compliance, claiming my driveway had excessive dust accumulation. My driveway. A paved surface. Covered, apparently, in imaginary dust. It was so blatantly fabricated that I actually laughed, which made Mason's smirk twist into something uglier. He leaned in and said, "The board doesn't appreciate troublemakers. Handle your dues." Quietly. It wasn't a warning. It was a threat. That was the moment I fully understood what the board was doing. They had raised the fees illegally at midnight, falsified documents, and now were weaponizing violations to intimidate anyone who questioned them. And they weren't even hiding the bullying. They were relying on fear to keep everyone silent. I refused to be part of that silence. I pulled out my phone and recorded Mason right there on my porch. His sneer dropped, and he immediately tried to backpedal, saying I was misinterpreting tone. But I had what I needed, proof they were retaliating. After he left, I walked the neighborhood to see how bad things really were. I talked to residents who normally avoided confrontation, and each had a story. One father received a violation for the angle of his parked car. A single mother was written up for having a welcome mat that wasn't the approved beige shade. Another woman had been hit with a $450 fine for having a small decorative birdhouse her late husband built. It was clear the board had turned Thornridge into a hostile environment and was squeezing every resident financially and emotionally. The midnight fee increase was just the latest squeeze dot, but corruption always leaves fingerprints, and I started connecting dots. The financial reports posted on the HOA portal outlined urgent landscaping repairs and security system upgrades. The problem? The landscaper listed had shut down months ago, and the security company didn't even service our neighborhood. The invoices were doctored, some with mismatched signatures, others with weird, repeating timestamps. It felt less like an HOA and more like a money laundering operation disguised as community management. I knew I needed backup. Not physical backup, legal backup. So I called someone the board didn't know about. My cousin, Jordan, a municipal law attorney who specialized in HOA misconduct cases. When I told Jordan everything, he didn't sound surprised. "This is classic," he said. "They're banking on residents not knowing the bylaws. But if they raised fees without a recorded vote and posted falsified minutes, that's not just unethical, it's criminal." He told me exactly what to gather: timestamps, screenshots, archived pages, financial reports, and any witness accounts. Lucky for me, I had all of that and more. But Jordan also warned me, once they realize you're building a case, they'll double down. Expect harassment, intimidation, maybe even attempts to discredit you. I had already experienced the first wave on my doorstep. What came next would prove he was right. Because that same evening, something happened that confirmed the board was watching me too closely. A white SUV with no plates parked across from my home and sat there for hours. No one got out. No one rolled down a window. It just watched. And that's when I realized they were preparing for war. And I was ready for it. The next morning, the white SUV was gone, but the silence it left behind felt even louder. I stepped onto my porch cautiously, half expecting another fabricated violation taped to my door. Instead, I found something worse: a bright orange final warning notice stuffed into my mailbox with no envelope. No seal, no signature, just the HOA's logo stamped at the bottom like a threat burned into paper. It accused me of engaging in hostile behavior toward HOA personnel, referring, of course, to the video I took of Mason threatening me. They twisted the narrative instantly, turning their misconduct into my alleged aggression. Classic manipulation tactic. I stood in my driveway, staring at the notice, feeling the weight of how far they were willing to go to protect their secret. They weren't just panicked, they were mobilizing. I took the notice inside, scanned it, and sent it directly to Jordan. Within minutes, he called back, sounding half irritated and half impressed. They're escalating faster than expected. They're trying to build a paper trail that paints you as unstable. Don't take the bait. But that was the problem. They weren't waiting for me to react. They were manufacturing reactions. And soon, the board found new, creative ways to apply pressure. At noon, I heard voices outside. When I looked, I saw two board members, Evelyn Marsh, the board president known for her passive-aggressive smile, and Tobias Granger, the treasurer who always looked like he was calculating something, standing at the edge of my lawn, pointing at my house while pretending to review documents. When I stepped outside, their conversation fell silent. Evelyn flashed that businesslike smile. "Mr. Harlan," she said in a tone that dripped with condescension, "we understand you have concerns regarding last night's vote. We're happy to clarify through the appropriate channels." Tobias added, "But your recent disruptive behavior complicates things." They were laying groundwork publicly, visibly, so if anything happened, neighbors would believe their version. I didn't argue with them. Instead, I did exactly what Jordan advised. I recorded. The moment my phone appeared, Evelyn's smile stiffened and Tobias glanced away. "Recording HOA officials without consent is prohibited," Evelyn snapped. She was lying completely and confidently. State law allowed recordings in public spaces without notification. They depended on residents not knowing that. I kept filming. They eventually left, pretending they had more important matters, but their flustered departure was proof enough. They weren't in control of the narrative anymore. Later that day, while backing up files to an external drive, I discovered something that made my stomach drop. Hidden inside the HOA portal, buried under mislabeled folders, was a document titled Emergency Vote Outline Fee Adjustment Execution. It was dated 3 days before the midnight meeting. The board had planned the fee increase in advance, then staged the vote to make it look legitimate. Even worse, the document included a checklist. Fabricate urgency, minimal resident notification. Consolidate authority if questioned. Initiate enforcement actions immediately. Last line read, identify potential dissenters. My name was circled. For the first time since this started, I felt something colder than anger vulnerability. They hadn't just anticipated resistance. They expected mine specifically. I wasn't just another homeowner to them. I was a variable they had already accounted for. And the SUV that had been parked outside suddenly made a lot more sense. That evening, I shared everything with Jordan over a video call. He leaned forward, eyebrows knit, the glow from his laptop screen sharpening the seriousness in his face. "This isn't just an unethical board," he said. "This is coordinated fraud. And the moment we expose it, they'll burn their own records before admitting fault." Then he said something that stuck with me. "They're acting like people who know they've been caught. That's when they make mistakes. That's when they slip." And he was right, because the board's biggest mistake was coming next, and it would finally give me the leverage I needed. 2 days later, the HOA finally made the mistake Jordan predicted, but it didn't come quietly. It arrived in the form of a bright red intent to lien letter taped "No," glued to my front door like a badge of humiliation meant for the entire neighborhood to see. The bold print at the top read, "Urgent, unpaid adjusted fees." Adjusted. Not raised, not modified, not approved with resident input. Just adjusted, as if the new amount had always existed, and I had simply failed to pay it. But the part that caught my eye, the part that made my pulse spike, was the timestamp in the upper left corner, printed at 12:03 a.m. They didn't even try to hide that it was produced after the midnight vote. They were incriminating themselves in plain sight. I ripped the letter off and brought it inside, scanning it under the bright kitchen light. It accused me of failing to pay a fee increase that had been lawfully enacted following emergency procedural adjustments. That phrase alone could have been a legal comedy sketch. Emergency procedural adjustments? They were inventing terminology to justify their actions. But what they didn't realize was that every new document they threw at me only added to the pile of evidence proving misconduct. I sent it to Jordan immediately, and this time he didn't sound irritated or amused. He sounded energized. "This is perfect," he said. "This shows their backdating justification. They're panicking. And when people panic, they leave fingerprints." That same afternoon, something else happened that confirmed just how desperate the board had become. A few neighbors stopped me while I was walking back from the mailbox. One of them, an older man named Mr. Callahan, leaned close and whispered, "They sent out a notice saying you're under investigation for disturbing the community peace. Is that true?" Another resident, visibly uncomfortable, added, "They said you've been harassing the board." My stomach dropped not from fear, but from the realization that the board wasn't just trying to intimidate me. They were actively poisoning my reputation. They were terrified I might expose the truth first, so they went on the offensive, hoping to isolate me before I could gather support. But what they didn't count on was the power of visibility. With every public act they made, with every neighbor they tried to turn, they actually drew more attention to the story. People became curious. Some started asking questions. A few even whispered that the fee increase seemed suspicious. The crack in the board's control was widening. Later that evening, I checked the HOA website again, expecting more fabricated reports or hidden documents. Instead, I found something so careless it almost felt intentional. A folder labeled Meeting Notes Archive with view permission set to public. When I clicked, I found a PDF titled Revised Meeting Summary Midnight Session. But it wasn't finished. It was a draft. A draft filled with comments like, "Use stronger language to justify urgency. Remove reference to pre-vote conversations. Align dates, avoid contradictions." It was the smoking gun Jordan warned me to watch for. Someone had uploaded the wrong file. And suddenly everything clicked. The board was scrambling internally. They were editing their story as they went. They were leaving behind digital footprints, so blatant it was almost laughable. I downloaded everything: screenshots, timestamps, metadata. I backed it up twice, then sent copies to Jordan. When he saw the draft notes, he let out a long exhale. "They're cooked," he said. "They don't realize it yet, but they're absolutely cooked. Now it's just a matter of time." But time was exactly what the board didn't want me to have, because the next morning they tried to force my hand in the most aggressive way yet. The next morning, a pounding knock jolted me awake before sunrise. Not a polite knock in aggressive, deliberate hammering meant to intimidate. When I opened the door, 3 HOA officials were standing on my porch. Evelyn, Tobias, and a man I'd never seen before wearing a windbreaker labeled Compliance Officer. His expression was stern, rehearsed, the kind of face someone wears when they've been instructed to play the villain. Evelyn stepped forward first, smiling like she was about to present me with a charity award rather than a threat. "Mr. Harlan," she began, "due to your repeated non-cooperation with the adjusted fee schedule, the board has authorized on-site inspection to assess potential lien enforcement." In other words, they wanted to enter my home. The audacity was astonishing. I stood in the doorway blocking the entrance. "You're not stepping inside." Evelyn's expression flickered, the smile tightening. Tobias, who rarely spoke, added, refusal will be documented as obstruction. That may accelerate legal consequences. Their tactic was clear: overwhelm, pressure, corner. What they didn't know was that Jordan was already on standby. I pressed record on my phone and held it up deliberately. State the legal basis for entering my home without a warrant. The compliance officer, suddenly less confident, shifted uncomfortably. Evelyn snapped, "Turn that off. You're not authorized to film HOA officials." Another lie. Another bluff. I repeated my question. None of them answered. Instead, Evelyn muttered that the board would be escalating this matter immediately, then stormed off with the others trailing behind her. As they walked away, I captured every second on Video 3 HOA. Officials attempting to intimidate a resident into granting unauthorized access. It was pure gold for what Jordan and I were building, but the real shock came an hour later. I received an automated email from the HOA portal stating that my case had been upgraded to Level 3. Enforcement, a category normally reserved for dangerous property violations, like collapsing structures or major safety hazards. Their justification? Known compliance with revised community standards. Revised standards that were never legally enacted. Revised standards that didn't exist on paper until the board invented them in that midnight meeting. When I forwarded everything to Jordan, he called me immediately faster than he ever had before. His voice was sharp with urgency. They're trying to box you in legally before you can expose them. They want to appear proactive so that if we file a complaint, they can argue you're a chronic violator. He paused, then added, "We're switching strategies. It's time to go public." I knew what that meant. The videos, the forged documents, the draft meeting notes, the fabricated violations, everything we'd collected would be compiled into a single irrefutable timeline. But going public meant war, and the board, already frightened and desperate, would not sit still while their empire collapsed around them. Still, something inside me shifted. Fear gave way to determination. They wanted to crush me quietly, behind closed doors. So I would pull the doors open and shine a floodlight straight into their shadows. And as Jordan helped me prepare the public report, neither of us knew that the board had already scheduled a sudden emergency inspection hearing, one designed specifically to trap me. The battle was about to reach its boiling point. The emergency inspection hearing was scheduled for 7 p.m., and the language of the notice was intentionally intimidating. Mandatory resident appearance required. Failure to comply will result in immediate enforcement actions as permitted by HOA bylaws. The notice didn't specify what enforcement actions, which was precisely the point. Ambiguity breeds fear. The board was counting on me folding, but when I walked into the clubhouse that evening, video equipment ready, I knew something was different. The room was unusually full. Several residents, some I'd never spoken to before, were seated in the back row, whispering among themselves. The tension was thick, but the most noticeable shift was on the board members' faces. They looked rattled. Evelyn avoided eye contact. Tobias kept checking his phone. The compliance officer from earlier sat rigidly like a guard dog. Something had shaken them. The meeting began with Evelyn, reading from a pre-written script, her voice steady, but her hands trembling slightly. She accused me of aggressive conduct, non-compliance, and obstruction, each word delivered like a rehearsed bullet point. When she finished, Tobias moved to introduce a motion to issue a fine and begin lien proceedings. But before he could finish, a voice from the back interrupted. It was Mrs. Klein, a resident who'd lived in the community longer than anyone. "When were we notified of a fee increase?" she asked loudly. Evelyn froze. Tobias swallowed. The compliance officer shifted uneasily. More residents spoke up next. I didn't get a notice. What midnight meeting? Why wasn't the vote announced? Why is his fee higher than mine? It was exactly what the board feared. My quiet collection of evidence had grown into visible doubt among the community. Evelyn regained her composure long enough to claim the board had followed standard procedure. That was when I stepped forward, plugged my laptop into the projector, and calmly said, "Let's test that claim." I displayed the metadata from the fake meeting summary. Gasps rippled through the room. I showed the draft file with the damning edit notes. Residents leaned forward, eyes wide. Then I played the footage of the HOA officials threatening entry into my home without legal basis. By the time the video ended, the entire room had shifted against the board. Evelyn attempted to adjourn the meeting, claimed the evidence was taken out of context, and accused me of manufacturing controversy. But the damage was done. Even the compliance officer looked blindsided. For the first time, the board wasn't in control. Jordan, who had joined via video conference, spoke next. On behalf of my client, we are filing a complaint with the state's HOA Oversight Division, along with a civil action for fraudulent enforcement practices. Tobias turned pale. Evelyn's voice cracked as she insisted they needed time to review. But the residents weren't interested in excuses. They wanted answers. And the board was running out of lies. The fallout began immediately. Word spread through the community faster than the board could contain it. By sunrise the next morning, neighbors I'd never spoken to were stopping me in the street, asking questions, sharing stories of strange fee inconsistencies, past threats, unexplained charges. It was like shining a light into a dark attic suddenly. Everyone saw the dust, the cobwebs, the rot that had been there for years. The HOA attempted its own damage control. They sent a community-wide email blaming clerical errors, claiming the midnight meeting was misinterpreted, and insisting they always operate transparently. It would have been laughable if it wasn't such a blatant insult to everyone's intelligence. Their message ended with, "The board requests patience as we clarify miscommunications." That phrase alone told the community everything they needed to know. The board was cornered, and scrambling got meanwhile. The State Oversight Division responded to Jordan quicker than expected. The evidence we submitted, especially the metadata documenting backdated files, triggered an investigation. The board was formally notified that all enforcement actions, including their fabricated lien threat, were suspended pending review. The same board that tried to intimidate me with fake authority now had to answer to real authority. But the moment that sealed their fate came 3 days later at a mandatory community meeting held by the Oversight Division. Almost the entire neighborhood showed up. The investigator, a calm but firm man named Officer Ramirez, stood at the front of the room holding a stack of printed documents. "We have reviewed the materials submitted," he began, "and have found multiple procedural irregularities, including unauthorized fee adjustments, falsified records, and coercive enforcement tactics." Evelyn visibly deflated. Tobias looked ill. The compliance officer refused to lift his head. Officer Ramirez continued, "Effective immediately. This board is suspended pending full audit. A temporary administrator will assume responsibilities until elections can be held." That was it. The board that had controlled the community with fear, secrecy, and manipulation collapsed in under 10 minutes. After the meeting, people approached me not just to thank me, but to apologize for believing the board's lies. Some shared stories they'd been too afraid to speak about before. Over time, the neighborhood became more connected, more watchful, more aware of how easily power can turn toxic when left unchecked. As for me, I wasn't interested in revenge. I just wanted fairness, transparency, and peace. And surprisingly, I got all three. The temporary administrator reversed every fabricated violation, dismissed all fees, and implemented new rules requiring open meetings, advance notice, and recorded minutes available to all residents. 1 month later, Election Day came. Evelyn, Tobias, and the compliance officer all resigned before ballots were even printed. A new board took over, one built on accountability rather than control. And me? I kept the external hard drive with every piece of evidence, not out of fear, but as a reminder. Power thrives in the dark, but the moment you turn on the lights, it scatters.